Hey Jason, thank you so
Hey.
much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So we had a very nice chat a couple of months ago, and here we are doing a podcast together.
Yeah.
You have a very diverse and intriguing background, so can you share a quick introduction? Like who is Jason?
Oh, who is Jason? I'm still trying to answer that question at 51 years old. I'm still trying to answer who is Jason. But basically, uh, professionally, I have a background in some theater design and performance and design space, and moved into there actually into a church ministry space. Actually, was a experienced designer, creative director. And when I say experienced designer, I like to say that more think theme park, not app. This actually this was before apps, so it really didn't even matter. But I did that in a very large church, and created experiences where people could have, like, kids and parents and adults even could have connection between the world they live in and God and the noise through that. So that's where I did that for about 12 years. I moved in from there into like an international nonprofit where I actually started learning the tools and techniques to what I was already doing. So I didn't have the workshop experience then. I didn't have the facilitation experience then. It was really more just creative and dreaming and just trying to figure it out. And then I got into this nonprofit mission space where they were doing those kinds of things. They were doing human centered design. They were doing a lot of stuff from IDEO, and then it moved into some stuff that AJ and Smart was doing and other organizations. And there I learned a lot about actually how to help other people bring their creativity out. And that got me super excited because I'm like, hey, everyone's creative. And rather than just wait for me to come up with the idea, what if we're going to get better ideas when we do it together? And so that led me into this space now where I've helped organizations think through really anything they want to do, whether it's a digital experience or a physical experience or something immersive, whatever anyone needs. I use tools and techniques to help people unlock their creativity and then put that creativity into action. And I call that imagination architecture. And that's what I do. I basically say imagination is the ability to come up with the idea, creativity is the process of creating it. Um, and then when it comes to innovation, it's like that's the happy result. So innovation often comes from trying to solve problems or serve people in new and creative ways. And when you do that, you often break through and break new barriers. So that's me in a nutshell. I have a that's professionally me. Personally me, I have a wife. We've been married for 22 years and a daughter who's 15 and pursuing her own desires to be a storyboard artist and performer. So that's that's us in a nutshell.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
And you said you studied theater, right?
Yes. Yeah.
What
Actually,
made you want to study theater?
you know, so it was interesting. I actually got into theater in a way a lot of people. I didn't have a desire necessarily to be a performer. Performance became came to me later. Uh, Other than playing around as a kid in the backyard, I always wanted to create stories and live out adventures that were going on in my imagination. And when I got into high school, just there was no outlet there I could find at the time in traditional education, at least in my context, that I could say, "Oh, I can express this." But then I was given the opportunity to go and be part of a performing arts school, and they actually were interested in me for tech theater. And so what got me in was really me coming in, and I'm a rather large individual, and so the teacher saw that I could pick up heavy things and move them around, not very difficult, and she was super excited about that. So my tech theater teacher was like, "I really like the fact that you can pick that up," and so that actually got me into tech technical theater, which then I discovered, and I'm not really big into construction or painting or things like that, but I got into lighting design, set design, and eventually directing. And so those types of things, having this big picture of creating an experience for the audience member where they're coming in, and especially in theater, oftentimes you're not performing anything new. You're performing a work that's been done countless times across generations. And so to find the thing about that that's new and interesting that would bring out something that maybe the audience hasn't experienced before was a wonderful challenge. And you learn, and also to do it in a way that typically you were doing it in less than ideal settings. Whether or not it's not, we're not talking about professional theater, we're talking about converted spaces in high schools and things of that nature, and being able to do that in a way that with less than ideal circumstances actually makes you more creative and more interesting in those respects. So that's what got me into theater. So I guess short answer, I could lift things, and that made people happy.
That's
You can pick
important.
that up. That's good.
Okay, so then you got your first skills in experience design,
Mm-hmm.
and then you went into church work.
Yeah, yeah. So I my faith background is Christian, and there was in my expression we were often experience what's called, I had a lot of affinity for the church growing up. I had a lot of affinity for how the church as a people come together and encourage one another to connect to God. But I actually had a big affinity for the actual space, the facilities of that space, and where that took place. And so, in doing that, I often would say, I wish I could do in church what I could do in theater, because in church, I felt like sometimes we were so intellectual or so almost even in some respects afraid of artistic expression, which is not common. I mean, that actually came out of the church. If you look at the church historically, they weren't always afraid of that. But in some ways, I felt like it was missing in my context. And I'm like, well, I think that there's a way to create experiences using this to connect people to God. And so that's what led me on that kind of path. What got me into the actual children's ministry space, which was not my experience. I would say I was very, I wasn't really interested in working with kids. Not that anything wrong with it. I love kids, but it wasn't like I didn't have this passion for children or anything of that nature. But the environment of this church that I was a part of when I started getting into children's ministry believed the same things that I did. The people there believed the same things that I did. If we could create these experiences that engage these young hearts and tell them that they're loved, that God's not mad at them, that they're not this terrible thing, but instead that they're really precious and loved. We're setting them up for a life of understanding that as an adult. And so when I got into that space, I saw that they were like-minded and also were like, we want to do really like interesting things and cool things and things that we shouldn't be able to do. I was like, well, that is interesting to me. And it happened to be a large, very large church. For us at the time, the church was around 30,000 people, so spread out over different campuses. But the one I was at. We probably averaged 15 to 18,000 people every weekend. So that translated into around 3,000 kids on average. So you're dealing with large numbers and large spaces. So we actually had a lot of ability to do that. So we could create these experiences. And that led us to building a big building. And we built this big building and not having kids yet. We actually, my wife and I, we had kids later. So I dove into a lot of the things Disney because I'm like, well, that's where kids go. So I want to go where kids go and I want to understand what they're engaging with. So it meant lots of and vacations were spent at Disney, which we loved. We had a blast. We weren't suffering at all. It was a great time. Lots of space for that. lots of space for watching Disney entertainment, Disney movies, Disney shows, going, okay, how do you tell stories? How do you engage in these stories? How do you create these experiences? And then going, we actually at the church had about 160,000 square foot building that was just for the kids. And I was going, how do we take this space and create a world that's narrative that the kids can immerse themselves in, that leads them into this place? Then we could say church is separate from everything you experience. It's a unique place to anything you experience outside in the rest of your life. So that's kind of how I got into the ministry space. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very important job, like helping children go into the love space more than the fear space.
Mm-hmm,
Thank you for
mm-hmm,
doing that.
mm-hmm.
Um, and I read this really interesting thing about temples, old and new,
Yeah.
that they bring our brainwaves into alpha brainwaves, which is really
Oh,
cool.
that's
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
just the design. Um, yeah, you can look more into that.
No,
So you said, hmm?
that because that's amazing, because that's one of the things that when I'm working with groups, that's what I'm trying to get them into, is those alpha brainwaves, because that alpha is where you're going to find your creativity. It's those moments in the shower and walking the dog and working out and doing the different things, and you're like, you have that aha moment. It's because you've accessed that, at least the way I understand it, you've accessed that alpha space. And so that I did not know that. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Never.
apparently you can do it with architecture as well.
Yeah, no, fantastic. That's very cool.
Yeah. Um, you said you got inspired by
Mm-hmm.
Disney's approach to experience design, right? What
Yes,
stood out most about their process?
their
And how have you
process.
taken those learnings into your work?
Okay, yeah, their process is heavily steeped in story. And we actually had an opportunity to have lunch with a couple of, probably three, well, actually lunch or dinner with three different Imagineers over the years. And they came from different disciplines. One was a ride designer, he was a ride engineer. One was a graphic artist, and one was a architecture kind of lead person. And all of them would say the same thing, is that we are telling a story with this environment. And this is like, what kind of story do we want to tell? And even as they tried to weave in new technologies, like things that would speed up the process, like faster menus, because you could do touchscreen menus and order your food rather than wait in line and talk to somebody, they still had to figure out how to make that fit in the story of that theme of that restaurant. So like everything they did was steeped in story. And that really informed how I approached, how I taught, how I designed spaces, what we were trying to accomplish with anything. We did a gamified camp, where that's what we did too, is that the entire camp was set up like a game and it had a narrative, but everything we did, we felt like it was important to have a narrative. And it wasn't hard to connect that to what we were trying to communicate, because if you read scripture, I read scripture holistically. It is a narrative. It's a narrative of God and man through that space. So Disney's influence on that was help me solidify, like, how do I craft this as a narrative, no matter what it is I'm doing.
Um, yeah. What are your favorite tools for experience design? And maybe you can share your process
Sure,
when you
sure.
work with your clients.
So I like to I have two or three influences that really help me understand kind of how I go about this. One is most of which have kind of come into me later, but the tools I would use was to start with what is the feeling we're trying to accomplish. And so those, I've actually found a book called Experience Design where they talk about the same things. But it's like, what is the feeling we're trying to accomplish here? What's the overarching emotion? And what do I want them to feel? Can we sum that up? And that becomes our like anchor point for how we design the spaces. And then the second tool I like to use to do that, just to ask yourself, what if? What if we did this? And that one example was, I was standing in our building one time and looked around, and they had lots of windows and lots of modern architecture, but I kept thinking it lent itself to feeling like it was like it was so, like there's a lot of metal, a lot of very clean lines and wood and things like that. And I was like, it feels like it could be a space station. What if it was a space station? And so we asked that question, what if? And then that what if question leads us to discover, to exploring, how would we go about that? So we're saying, what if this was a space station? What would have to be true? And we would walk around and say, well, the windows, you would see starscapes. Well, you might need a control panel. Well, you might need information. What happens at this space station? And so we would ask a series of questions that we would say, okay, these questions are helping us figure out like what we would create that tells our story. So we have a why, and then we're like, why are we doing this? What's the overarching emotion? That's our why. And then we go into what it is that what if we could do blank? And a lot of times, one of my influences is a guy named Duncan Wardle. He used to be vice president of creativity and innovation at Disney. One that created, amongst a lot of things, created the Magic Band, sent a Buzz Lightyear toy into space, and then served on the space station, things like that. But that's one of his things is he asks what if, and then the way he takes that what if, and I really love, is he says, let's break down the rules of a thing, and we'll say, what's the rules, and then let's pick a rule and break it and see what happens if we break it. So depending on your context, it really works. You say, okay, well, what if this was a space station? Well, what are the rules here? Well, we can't tear the building down. So what if we could change it? And so we said, okay, well, what will we change it with? And we were able to kind of start dreaming along those spaces. And then from there, once you've got your why and you're asking those questions, I tend to then go, what's the story we're trying to tell? So I've got my location, I've got my thing. A lot of times I think other people, well, this is where I learned I wasn't a writer. I was actually a narrative designer in a sense, because I can write, but people are like, what's the story? I'm like, well, I don't have the story yet, but I know where it's going to be, and I know what I want to do. And so I would kind of go about that. And then from there, I start working on, well, what's the narrative we're trying to tell? That this stuff's going to happen is because the narrative, actually happens to me as a designer. It happens the last. The stories part happens actually the last of the process, because you establish your why, your world, you establish what goes on in that world, you establish certain things, and then the story becomes the series of events that take place within that world. And so, from a design perspective, that's the way I kind of approach experience design. Why am I doing this? Where is it? What if we did this? And then what's the story comes later in that process.
Very helpful. Thank you. What's been your favorite experience design project so far, and what made it so impactful?
My favorite experience design project. Actually, it was that first space station. It was that designing that space station was very cool, because we never done anything like it. It was a complete like unknown. We had no idea what was going to happen, and it was a very ambitious task. And there's a couple reasons why it was my favorite. One was the actual end result. I was very happy with. We created bulkheads. We did literally create star fields we printed star fields and covered every window, so that when the sun hit those windows, it looked like it was stars popping through you could like see into space, and we had planets and things like that, which we were super excited about. We had control panels in a rocket. We did a history of space travel, so that there were things for the kids to interact with. We had all the sound effects and things going, and we had a story. But we did it all with people who just signed up to help. Like we didn't have the funds. We weren't Disney. We didn't have millions of dollars to go, okay, we can just bring in a crew and build this, and we didn't have all that. So we basically asked. We said, anybody here at the church that does rocket engineering. We were like, yeah, are you a rocket engineer? Are you a electrician? Are you a robotics engineer? We just asked these random questions. And we said, we're going to have this meeting and we're going to tell you what we're going to do. And we had all these people show up. Half of them could do what we asked for. The other half were, what are you trying to do? They that was why they were just there to see what we were trying to accomplish. And when you get onto those people, and those people got excited about why we were doing it, what we were trying to accomplish with kids, and what we were trying to do. So I would say that's probably that first one. We did several after that. We did a Western town, trip around the world, and we actually built the theme park eventually. But theme, but that first one to me is probably my favorite, just because of what it did, the community it created, and the event and the actual end result.
Sounds really awesome. I would love to be involved in something like that myself.
You would be surprised at the kind of people that got involved. It was really cool. It was really cool.
Hmm. Let's go into imagination a bit now.
Yeah.
I would say imagination is a word I haven't really seen being used in a business context. It's more creativity
Mm-hmm.
and a lot about innovation. So you have imagination in your title,
Yes.
imagination
Yes.
architect. What does imagination mean to you?
Well, see, to me, the imagination is the spark. It's where we get all the end result, the rest of it. So I kind of was like, I mean, I like creativity as a word to talk about coming up with new ideas, but I was like, and when you get into the idea of taking your imagination and kind of diving back, it's just a freedom there. There's a freedom that's not built into the constraints of whatever your context is. And Duncan actually often talks about this too. He talks about a thing called your river of thinking, where you get stuck. You get stuck in like, this is how we do it. And I know how to do it. And I know what you can do and I know what you can't do. And the thing is that if you can tap into your imagination, you know that those things no longer exist. What can and can't kind of go away. Anything is possible. So that's why I like using the phrase of imagination, because all these things happened from someone's imagination. If you look at an old picture of Steve Jobs, when he was with Apple, actually, when he had left Apple, or he had been moved out of Apple for a season, and he was starting another
When he
company.
worked with Pixar?
Right before Pixar, he started this company, and honestly, I don't remember the name right now, but he started this other company, and it was a computer company, and there was a picture I saw of him with a monitor, and all the icons on that monitor, and they're almost the same icons that are on iPhones today. And I'm like, he saw that. Oftentimes it didn't work. The first iPhone, when he's standing up there talking about it, didn't work. But he saw those things in his imagination before they ever became reality. And that is why I'm like, that's where the spark of everything, creativity, innovation, everything's going to come from that place, that dream spot of what if anything was possible. And if you can get people back to that space, they really do generate new ideas and ideas that work. And it's like you want their head back in the clouds. Often I say, get your head out of the clouds. I'm like, no, I want your head in the clouds, because in the clouds is where we're going to find that next answer.
What are some of the biggest challenges you faced though when helping your clients
Um,
unlock their imagination?
a lot of it is their belief that their imagination isn't that rich, or their belief that they can't come up with new ideas, or the belief that they're not particularly creative. One of the things I try to explain at the beginning of all my workshops is, I'm like, all of you are creative. I'm like, if you've ever taken a salt packet and stuck it under a table so the table doesn't wobble, that's an innovation. You don't think of it that way, but it is. You took a salt packet, which is meant for one thing, and you solved a different problem that salt packet was supposed to do. And in our imagination, in our wonder, we make connections that we wouldn't normally make. in those constraints, and convincing someone that no, you actually have all the same potential that anyone you've ever thought was creative that they have. And I try to use the example of it's like going to a gym and you look at somebody in a gym who's super fit and you're going, wow, I can never be like that. Well, sure, you can be fit because all they have over you is they have more reps. They've had more opportunity. They've been there longer. So when people were like, you're super creative, you come up with the off the wall ideas. Well, as a background in theater and those expressions, I had lots of reps, had lots of opportunities to create new. Every time you did a show, you created a new idea. Every time you did anything, it was like, okay, what are we going to do different this time? So that's reps. And if you haven't had a lot of reps doing that, if most of your professional work has been repetitive work, you often feel like, well, I'm not creative. And I'm like, that's not at all true. Not at all true. And so I guess the biggest challenge there, though, is it takes a minute for people to kind of get comfortable with that idea that they're like, oh, I am actually creative. I actually can do this. And that's where the tools and techniques come in, the different things you can do to open up people's ideas.
Oh, please share.
Oh, well, one of them I like to do is called a bad idea brainstorm. And so you set the problem and you're like, okay, what's the worst way we could solve this problem? What would be just an awful, awful solution? And you really kind of push them to have fun with it and say, you could even borderline unethical. It's like you really just kind of do some things that people are like, oh, that would just be the terrible. I did one time, we were doing one and it was a video game where we wanted to send them a communication in the video game. So like you're playing the game and you want to, what's the best way to communicate through this interface? And one of the bad ideas was email the kid's parent to have the kid's parent come and read them the email at the right time. It's terrible. There's no way it's going to work. But you do that, you get people laughing. And when they get laughing, they kind of relax. They kind of start, getting comfortable with this idea. And then there's tapping into that alpha brain like we were talking about earlier. Humor is a great way to tap into alpha space. And so they get into that alpha brain and they're laughing. And then you go, okay, so let's take a couple of these ideas and say, what if we tweak this or this and it might actually be good? And they pick one or two. They're like, oh, well, this is terrible. But if you would just do it this way, it'd actually be a really good idea. And then they start kind of opening up and going, and this is before we're ever really trying to solve a problem. They're like, oh, okay, I can do this. And I'm like, yeah, you totally can do this. In fact, you're the right person for this. That's because you're dealing with this problem. You're the absolute right person. My job in those roles as a facilitator is not to come up with the idea. My job is to help the team come up with the idea and to guide them in that space. And so letting them see that not only are they imaginative, but you're the person we need today. Not somebody else. You're the person.
So we need some freedom to be creative, but we also need some structure for it, right?
Yeah.
It has to be a balance.
Yes.
So what are some ways that you're using to get to that balance?
So one of the ways I really like to use, because and I'm sure you're familiar with, you go for the space of divergence. We're going to go for a big kind of dream, and then we're going to come to a convergence, and then we're going to do it again. What do they call the double diamond, where you're doing that again? One of the ways I like to do that is a technique. It actually came from Walt Disney. Walt Disney came up with it. It was called the 3 rooms. And the story I read about it was that there were actually 3 physical spaces. And he would put people in those spaces. And one space was the dream space. And so they would go and they would dream. And they would sit there, and there's no reductive thinking, no constraints. Don't say we can't do that. It's only yes, we agree, yes, and we could do this, and yes, and we could do this, and just go as big as you can. And then they physically got up and moved into another space called it was a reductive space. It was a space for constraints. So you had this dream space, and you had this realist space. That's what they called it, the dreamer and the realist. And in the realist space, now it's like, okay, what's our budget? What's our physical limitations? What's our time frame? What's our all the constraints come into play. So now we've got this dream idea, and now we're packing it into something that we can actually do, which I thought was really kind of a cool way to think about it. All right, we went big. Now we're bringing it into something that's going to be what we can actually accomplish. And then they moved to a third room called the Critic's room, and that room's purpose was to push that idea as far as it could possibly go. So it wasn't quite another like expansive space where you were like, okay, we can just do anything. No, we have our constraints. We know what we can do. We know what we can accomplish. But is there anything else? Can we push it even further? What else can we do? How else can we do? And when you do that, I feel like you come up with a really interesting way to do it. Now, I can't like every client go, okay, well, you got to have 3 rooms. That's not really how that works. But what I can do is put us in that mindset. And so I actually used this recently. I was doing a design sprint with a group trying to build a leadership program for some schools. And we did the normal design sprint process where, we kind of set the goal and then the 2-year plan. And we walked that. We got through to what they wanted to build. And then they're like, okay, so this prototype, you build the prototype on the 3rd day. And they said, well, what do we do? And I was like, and so I walked them through that process to build the prototype because they didn't really have a framework to build their own prototype. They're like, we're not sure what to do, how to do it. I'm like, okay, well, let's do it this way. Let's go stream big. Let's put our constraints. Let's push the idea further. And that helped them get across the finish line with developing a prototype.
It would be really cool to have 3 rooms that we could then design and do all the good stuff. But if it's one space, okay, you can do different exercises to for the different phases. Is there anything else that you can do maybe with the same space?
Yeah. A lot can be done with indication, and it can be done a couple different ways. You can do it with by rearranging the space. So you have your dream space and you kind of do it and you go, okay, everybody take a break, make sure everybody leaves. And you rearrange the furniture, you rearrange the whatever and go, okay, and you create a space that indicates I want to be more restrictive. So maybe you go from open circles to squares, or you bring in a table, or you do something. Then now we're indicating that we're bringing in some reductive thinking. So when you're talking about expansive thinking, you want lots of open space. You don't want a lot of things in the way, not things between people. I'll have them use like notepads and things in their lap. I don't want them sitting at a table if I can avoid it. But then when it comes down to reductive, you can go, okay, we're going to reduce the space. So we're going to bring people around the table, and then maybe for the third thing, you kind of move the table out, but you keep the circle small. So it indicates that I want to think bigger, but I can't go but too far because we've already got our constraints in place. So sometimes too, as a facilitator, it's like where you might stand in the room where you have people look. So you could actually put up spaces, put up signs that say one thing or another, and then you're standing in that space and they're visually seeing that this is a space of expansive thinking, reductive thinking, kind of polishing, things like that. But indicating vocally, indicating physically, and indicating in a way that maybe even spatially will help participants kind of move mentally into the different spaces.
Yeah. You've worked with many different clients and industries and contexts. Are there differences in how you approach creative thinking and experience design for each?
Honestly, I other than trying my best to understand what they're trying to accomplish, making sure their why is solid, not really. I tend to take the same approach every time because I find it works regardless of what space you're in. I don't normally feel like I have to come up with brand new workshop ideas every new workshop. Normally I can say I have a bank that I can pull from and say, okay, Where I have to adjust is if sometimes I've been working in international context, you have language barriers. So if we're not speaking the same language and we're working through a translator, I've got to I got to structure the workshop differently because it's slower. It's just naturally slower. I'll speak, translator has to speak. Someone speaks to me, translator has to translate. So you've already doubled your communication every single time, and those increments will spread things out. So knowing that people get fatigued in a workshop between 60 and 90 minutes, and you need to take a break between everybody any of those times. If I'm thinking about that plus translation, oftentimes I'll figure out longer. But as far as exercises go, they tend to not be really very different because those exercises work. They do.
It's for humans.
Mm-hmm.
We're all humans.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. You said before that in your church work, you worked on creating experiences that bring people closer to God.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been thinking a lot about the absence of spirituality in the workplace,
Yeah.
at least the majority. So what does spirituality mean? What would it mean in this context, and how do you see it fitting in the modern workplace?
Well, that's a great question because I think sometimes we um oftentimes we'll use how's the word I'm going to say it the right way, spirituality versus religion, and religion can tend to be a tough topic because religions often don't agree, and so we try to avoid it in the workplace because people are passionate about their faith naturally, and you would expect that. But we don't want to create these tensions that are that are hindrance to creativity. I don't want to listen to you because you don't believe as I do, so therefore um, we can't work together. So I kind of think of it in terms of you, as for at least the way I believe, is that we are a body, mind, and spirit. So all right, those are three things that are all true of every human being. And when we're creating experiences, whether it's an app, whether it's a program, whether it's something physically immersive, whatever it is you're designing, that you're going to be in those three, all three of those parts of you are participating, both in the creation and in the people you're trying to help or reach or engage. So the question is, where can we find not just physical immersion, but mental immersion, and then what's called ontological immersion, meaning, an immersion in meaning. And one of the things I try to do in my workshops is before we start working together, I try to do things to build common ground and try to do things to build space where we connect as people. Um, one of the ways I do that is with any kind of warm up activity where I'm trying to get you used to the idea of whether it's physically writing on sticky notes and putting things on the board, to if we're doing it online and we're using a Miro or a mural or one of the different programs. I try to find something personal to connect to the thing we're trying to build. So I had we were doing a project where we were trying to create something for families, and so one of the ways I did that was like I had everybody share a family experience that that was either positive or negative. Sometimes it's opposite. It's negative, but we're all sharing experiences of ourselves, of our story, and when we do that, we're tapping into that the person, the meaning of the person, and their kind of their spirit, in my opinion. So that's one of the ways I try to look at it, is that how can I address that in the workshop, but also how can I encourage that when they're designing their spaces or they're designing their programs. It's like, how does this, and one of the best ways I find to do that, how does this tap into the whole person, is by story. It just comes to, I'm a big fan of storyboarding, always have been. It's always typically my destination. Can we storyboard very simply 6 to 9 frames of how what we're doing intersects with the story of the person we're trying to serve, and how they intersect and how this actually fits into their life. Um, Another way is I try to, it's hard because of common understanding, but I try to avoid the term user, player, anything that's, I try to use people, person. I like to use names. If I like to use personas and use names in the personas, because to me, user is so dehumanizing. And I don't want to like espouse some kind of grand philosophy. I just find it like, what's a user? Like, what is what's it? And a player? They're people. We're trying to identify people versus us, but that to me somehow dehumanized. So I try to find a space from like, how can I speak identity into uh, these people we're trying to serve?
Those are some great ways to connect people to each other and to meaning.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have a big question incoming.
Okay.
So if you could design an ultimate experience, something that you would like maybe everyone to experience in the world,
Okay.
what would it look like and why?
All right. That's great. And I like how you phrased that question. I have a big question incoming. Like, get ready. Here it comes. Here comes the big question. To me, it would be some sort of walkthrough immersive experience that mixes media. It could be AR, could be just even mix of video, physical space, interactive, things that you can walk through that explores something that all humans deal with, that after going through the experience, and I think more, I don't know, are you familiar with the Meow Wolf organization? They do like,
No.
look them up. They're really cool. They're interactive, immersive art experiences, and you'll spend hours going through them. It's pretty astounding.
How did you call it again?
Meow Wolf. So just think a cat and a wolf, Meow Wolf, and you'll find them. They've got 4 installations in different parts of the United States, and they're working on their 5th. But basically, you go through this, and you kind of explore something that everybody deals with, whether it's stress or it's love or it's pressure, whatever. I mean, it's like, it can be different things. But the idea is that you explore it as a group, and that you end talking about it together. It's something that this experience leads to a connection, I think would be the way I would say it. Is so I think like a big expansive walkthrough where everybody kind of pursues their own path. You have your own agency. You can walk through and experience anything you want. And then, but there's a point where you're going to come together communally and share your experiences with the people you came with. And it's be meant for groups. I think that would be pretty awesome to go through something like that.
That sounds awesome. And with all the new technologies, it would be even more immersive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
For someone that wants to start with experience design, what resources would you suggest? Like book, favorite podcast, website?
Yes. Margaret Carrison has 2 books out. She was a former Imagineer at Disney, called Immersive Storytelling, and then The Art of Immersive Storytelling, where she's taking ideas from the game world and putting that into space, are great books to look at. There's also a book called Experience Design, written by, I forgot his name, but he founded Odyssey Works, and they basically create experiences for people, interactive theater and things of that nature. If you want to do reading, I would, if you want to learn any kind of workshop tools, I like AJ and Smart's classes are really good. If you just want a book resource that you think is going to be like, I just want to like kind of learn like book resource, Duncan Wardle's got a book called The Imagination Emporium. And I used imagination before I knew that's what he was calling his book. I just want to say that. But, but his book is probably the best book I've ever seen for thinking through a project holistically from beginning to end, where it's not only figuring out why you're doing something, it's also helping people engage their creativity, the tools and techniques in that book are super practical and easy to learn and easy to facilitate. And then the end results, how you figure out how this fits within your organization. He really, really did a nice job with that book. It's a really good book.
All right, I'll add it in my very long list.
What's funny is a lot of these came out recently, and um, Duncan's book came out last month. Margaret's new book came out last month. The other one came out in like 2023, I think, or 2022. The Experience Design also came out like 2022 or 23, and it's weird because it just those were the books I've came across, and I've read, I've read all kinds of things that we've done, but those I was like, this really says it well. And I'm a big fan of communication and good communication, and like going, okay, I can really understand what you're saying. So those books, they're going to seem relatively new, but they frame it in such a way that it's like it's really golden.
Mm-hmm. So what are your next steps now? What's in the plan?
Well, still working. I mean, I want to help clients and help them whatever industry they want to pull from, wherever in the world they want to pull from. I can go. I want to do more physical than virtual. That did a lot of virtual through the pandemic. Did a lot of virtual by the nature of an international nonprofit. But like one time, I did 3 different groups from 3 different parts of the world in one physical space using the same techniques, and that was so much fun. That's like I'm really more of a fan of physical personal than I am talking to people across. I mean, obviously we couldn't talk to each other if we didn't have this wonderful technology that allowed us to speak across the world. And I could speak into the future because you're 8 hours in the future for me, and it's there you are. But more physical things anywhere in the world that people want to go. And the other thing I'm trying to do is I'm starting a video game company studio. I've got a partner. He used to work with Disney, and he and Nintendo and some other notable game studios. And we got an idea for a game that we think is fun, and actually several games. We've kind of dreamed up a lot of IPs. But we want to start with one to make sure that we can do it right. And so we're working on it.
That's exciting.
Yeah. So we're working on that.
Could you share a little bit of a sneak peek of what the idea that you're working on?
So it's a game called Parable Stone. It is a 2D scroller. So this one is like more, I think, Mario or Metrovania, Metro or Castlevania, Metroid, things like that. So you're moving in a 2D screen, but you're on this young journey. This guy named Embron, he's journeying across this dark kingdom to save his sister. And along the way, he's helping people in different villages as he goes. And you're learning about not only the battle of helping people, but the battle within your own self, of fighting the own evil within yourself. So some of the levels involve him fighting versions of himself. Some of the levels involve him helping the grander story. So that's a little snippet of what we're hoping to create.
Cool. When do you think it will go live?
No idea, because we're in the pre-funding phase. So we're hoping we can build it in 2 years whenever we get the funding. So we're hoping hopefully soon we can start and have it in 2027.
Are you also doing crowdfunding, or are you looking for external?
We're looking for external right now. We haven't we've talked about crowdfunding. A lot of times people advise crowdfunding later in the stage, like when you've got more done, that people can go, oh, okay, they can jump on and use it as kind of a marketing tool. But if we can't find the external funding that we're looking for, we're going to go for crowdfunding.
I wish you all the best with it.
Thank you.
Looking forward to playing it.
Oh yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. Do you have any last remarks before we close?
Don't doubt yourself. Don't doubt your imagination. Don't doubt your creativity. Don't doubt your ability to bring that out in other people, because we are connected. We can do those things. And if you look at everyone as a creative genius in their own right, then you're going to set yourself up for success no matter what you do, because you can work together knowing that the way they think and the way they come about it is going to be vastly different from you, and it's going to be beautiful.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. This was great.
Oh, thank you for having me, Ellie. I appreciate it.